So just a quick one. We had a request to record the session today. So all the speakers have confirmed that they're okay with that. So I just started the recording.
Thanks, Jim. Satya, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very good.
Beautiful. Okay, so let me share my screen and tell me if you are able to see my...
We see the full screen. Now,
yeah, fantastic.
now it's good,
okay.
Yeah. Now it's good, perfect.
So, thank you very much, Rolf and Jim. A very warm welcome to all of you. As I mentioned in the email, which communicated about this event to all of you, we think of this as graduation. And in university, this is the happiest moment because it really culminates a successful completion of a lot of work. It's not the end of learning by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a big, big milestone. And so we're here really to celebrate it with you, and we appreciate you joining us because this is not the work of one person or even one team. It is the work of all of you who are on this call, and we have together come to this point. So where are we? Here from a research study done last year, 1 year ago, the estimated edge computing market size in 2021, that was last year, was just over $6 billion B. And it's estimated to grow to 1 order of magnitude larger in about 7 years, with a growth rate of over 30%, nearly 38%. Now, you have to take these things with a big grain of salt. I'm never quite sure how all these market studies get done, what assumptions they make. A different study done this year said that in 2020, we were already spending 3.6 billion, and that in 2025, which is just 3 years away, it will be up to 15.7 billion. Whatever the numbers, it is many billions of dollars. And just for calibration, the cloud computing market today is 2 orders of magnitude larger. It's over $350 billion. So in absolute terms, edge computing is real. In relative terms, it has a long way to go. And through the efforts of all of you on this call and many others who are not, we will grow edge computing someday to be as significant, as important as cloud computing. But in this part of our valedictory session, I really want to focus on how did we get here? And sometimes it's useful to think back and ask, what brought us on this journey? And so for me, as I sat down to put my thoughts together for this event, I had to reach back nearly 30 years to the very first significant event that brought us on this journey. Some years later, about 4 years later, there was another significant event. Then in the 2000s, there were a whole bunch of events clustered together. And then after 2015, when the OEC Initiative was created, we see the knee of the curve really bending and taking off. And in the past few years, almost every year has had a significant event or announcement. So let's look at these. About 30 years ago, the editor of IEEE Computer, which is the flagship publication of the IEEE Computer Society, sent me an email saying, hey, there's this new area called mobile computing that is just emerging. You know, the machines are smaller, the bits arrive by wireless. What difference does it make? Can you put together a thought piece that explains why this is different? And so I put together this 1 page, or actually 2 pages, I think, thought piece. You can find it on the web at the IEEE Explore site. But I've highlighted here the significant piece of it for our purposes. It was this observation that regardless of future technological advances, a mobile unit's weight, power, size, and ergonomics will always render it less capable than its static counterparts. Now that's a tall claim. I mean, I was 30 years younger then, so it was very definitely a tall claim to make, whatever age I was at that time. But the real question is, 30 years later, is this really true? And the answer is, if you look at the data from 1997, which is the earliest that I have, until 2021, it's absolutely true. If you compare the total compute capability for a given weight, size, etc., on a server versus what you can carry on mobile versus what you can wear, the difference is huge. Those that we think of this as the mobility penalty. That is, just the act of being mobile forces compromises to computational capabilities that are long-lasting, that can be overcome, but then those same steps also help what runs on the server or the cloud. So how do we overcome this? 1997, this paper, which is listed here, was published by our team. And this picture appears in that paper. And it is the first use of amplifying the capability of a mobile device using infrastructure compute. So this was for speech recognition. Remember, it's 10 years before Siri on the iPhone. And the mobile device in question was a small device called a PDA, Personal Digital Assistant, similar to the Palm Pilots of that era. So this is good. And there was a lot of work done by my team and others in the early 2000s on various aspects of how to do this, how to partition the computation, many questions that people are looking at again now in 2022. So sometime around 2004, in reflecting about the future of computing in this thought piece that is shown on the left here, I speculated that one of the huge use cases for offloading would in fact be to augment human computation. And the text on the right imagines a wearable device with continuous face recognition, whispering in your ear, essentially in augmented reality for cognition kind of way. The name of the person, maybe additional pieces of information. So obviously this is pure science fiction in 2004. But the point is, wearable cognitive assistants today and many of the AR, VR use cases that we're talking about today are precisely to do what this was looking at as science fiction. So the next big event on the horizon was the emergence of cloud computing. And AWS created EC2 in 2006, was immediately successful, and almost perfectly aligned with it was the emergence of the iPhone from Apple and services such as speech recognition, which use the iCloud. So by about the late 2000s, this concept that you would have mobile devices, you would have the cloud, and that's all you needed was beginning to take hold. But it's very clear to me that people were forgetting that end-to-end latency really matters. So with a group of people whom I was able to convince from Intel, from Microsoft, from AT&T, and other places, we put together our basically a thought piece that articulated the need for computing that was cloud-like in power, but much closer, much lower latency. And so this document, which is, many of you may have seen this document from 2009, people think of this as the founding manifesto of edge computing because it emerged after cloud computing was already real, and it articulated the need for this new tier of computing close to the user. Now, what was the state of mind of the world in 2009? Did people believe this? Did they feel that it was necessary? Normally, it's difficult because how are you going to find out what the state of the mind of people in 2009 was? But I have for you a perfect capture of the state of mind of people. So we submitted at the same time that we submitted that paper, we also submitted a very substantial proposal for $10 million, 2009 money, to the largest NSF program called the Expeditions Program for edge computing. It was rejected immediately. And the panel summary explaining the rejection is worth reading today in 2022. And I'll read it out to you. Many panelists, not just one, do not agree with the premise of the proposal that distant cloud computing incurs too high latency to be acceptable for mobile applications. They question the validity of such an assumption, and the proposal provides no real data to justify it. So in 2022, no group of very smart people would make such a statement. So that is progress in 12 years, which I'm very grateful for. So the next big event was actually, I'm not showing the event here, but I got this email one summer, 2013, from this guy I'd never heard from before, and a company I knew nothing about. The name of the person was Rolf Schuster. The company was Vodafone. I'd vaguely heard of Vodafone. But anyway, the rest, as they say, is history. Rolf and I became good friends and collaborators, as did Guenter, who was also at Vodafone. And by 2015, we had created the Open Edge Computing Initiative. So this picture, taken in June of that year, has many people from who are on the call today. You see Rolf right there in front. You see Guenter. We see Valerie there on the right. A number of others. Many graduate students have already graduated with their PhDs and gone on. Mike Kozich, I see, is here, and I think he's on the call. So very nostalgic. The thing that strikes me as I look at this picture is how young we all look. I guess that's an eternal thought on looking at old pictures. So after this, the events come fast and furious. It's the case that by 2018, my namesake at Microsoft Research, at Microsoft CEO, had spoken of the intelligent cloud and the intelligent edge, both being equally important to the future of Microsoft. A couple of years later, Microsoft announced Azure for Operators business unit, and that is headed, the CTO of it is Victor Ball, who was one of the original authors of the 2009 paper. Amazon announced Wavelength in 2019. And in 2021, just a year ago, Vodafone offered edge computing as a service in Europe. It had a program whereby companies could partner in creating new applications and services. And so it is very, very clear that at this point, edge computing is unstoppable. Certainly, nobody would say that the premise of edge computing has not been demonstrated. So I'd like to stop here. This is the journey that has brought us here. I want to turn it over to Rolf.
Thanks a lot, Satya. Thanks also for sticking to time. So let me take over from there. Let me just share that. So now we're almost there. So can you see that?
Yes, I can see that, Rolf.
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. So let me just go back one step. So it's a personal pleasure to be here today and to speak to you now, looking back a bit to what has happened, but no worries, I won't repeat what Satya has pointed out already. So, but it really has been a long journey now over more than 10 years, and you will see in a second what I find really relevant. I don't want to go through step by step, no worries, but I find some of the stories really interesting, and maybe that there are other ideas coming up in the future. And so for me, it's always good to to study a bit how do these ideas actually develop. So here, Satya has pointed out already, 2009 was his first paper, right? He just referenced it. A year later, first edge ideas were created at Vodafone. This is I find quite an interesting thing happening. At the time, I was responsible for 2 innovation funds with 2 big IT suppliers. And so I was, always looking around for new ideas, new business areas and stuff. And at that time, actually a sales representative of IBM came. He was very well connected to the CEO and the board of Vodafone. And he came up with the idea of said, well, look, Vodafone, how much do you pay for your base stations? We can deliver you general purpose machines for a fraction of the price you pay to Nokia and the others. So he came around with this sales pitch and saying, well, we can do the same thing, but it will be, I think he said, 20% of the cost by just using off-the-shelf general purpose hardware. So. And of course, he was wrong. It would not have worked with his general purpose machine. It was just not able to do that, right? But the idea was born to say, well, hey, why are these base stations and in general the network components still a black box combining hardware and software, right? And why do we pay so much money for it, right? So, and then it immediately came up with the next step of idea. If it were a general purpose platform, then we could do other things with it. Why? Then it's not closed anymore. We could have an application store on this, right? And we could work with low latency. This idea was already there, right? And so the idea was born, starting out from this sales pitch, right? Which I find quite remarking. In hindsight, we were not the only ones who had this idea. Obviously, Satya was there. There was another team in France who came more from the data center side, who said, what happens if we would distribute the data center all over the place? So that was an interesting start of this idea, and I always liked it. I pushed for it as much as I could, right? But what happened then was 2 things, right? One, I myself, I was also responsible for research cooperation, so I reached out to Satya and said, "Hey, Satya, we would like to work with you on this, right?" On one side, we had a cooperation with a university in Germany, more on the air interface, on the at the time 4G. Air interface. So this was one research cooperation. I wanted to add in more on the IT side, a research cooperation. That's why I reached out to Satya, and I started to fund his team on the topic of edge computing. But at the same time, my colleagues, and Guenter, you will recall that, started a more almost operational business development activity between Vodafone, IBM and MSN. So the IBM guy who had the idea with the general purpose hardware was still involved, and it pushed for it to really say, Nokia, we create a new type of base station that is open, that can actually deliver IT services to the user with much higher or lower latency, much better quality of service. So that was kind of we called it a task force. I was not directly involved there, but I always watched it from some distance, and they worked together. They went to later on Mobile World Congress with demonstrators and stuff. We also created ETSI-MEC at the time. Guenter and his team were involved in that. And at the same time, also there was a story from this German university, Professor Fettweis, the Mr. 1 millisecond, who always said we will go down to 1 millisecond one-way air on the air interface, right? So, and he termed this tactile internet, which points in the same direction as our kind of edge computing idea with opening up the base station. So that was quite well aligned. And so basically, this on more the business side, this was progressed, right? However, as you can imagine, IBM dropped out pretty soon because they don't touch, they only touch stuff that makes money within the next 6 months, and obviously this was not something which makes money in the next 6 months, right? So they dropped out. Nevertheless, Vodafone and Nokia continued with a demonstrator at Mobile World Congress with actually a new product. I was actually the guy responsible for base stations who created this new kind of base station with a separate compute unit that they call liquid computing. It was a ready-made product with all kinds of certification and stuff for outdoor, and then also the whole thing started with edge conferences and so on, right? So that was the one track. On the other hand, we started with working with Satya. Intel was there, Huawei was there, and Vodafone was involved, obviously. Satya has already been active in the area, so he had already developed this OpenStack version that was kind of made for edge computing. So he had discovery, had handoff functionalities, and so that was ongoing work, and then basically we in 2014, it was between 2014 and 15, we actually officially formed the OEC, and with web page, with kind of the framework around, and then basically when this OpenStack solution was ready, we actually presented it in at the OpenStack Summit in Tokyo, trying to convince the OpenStack community to say, hey guys, we do have a new opportunity for you. It's not just cloud; it's cloud and edge now, right? So that was a grandiose failure, right? Because they gave us the slot in the morning after the party, right? So so they were not really a large audience, and very audience that would be very very active. But in any case, it was good to be out there and to show that this works, right? And then the whole process with first conference started. Obviously, the liquid computing product didn't really see the light at the end of the day because it was just too early. Also, we have always told them, or at least Satya and myself we have always told them, let's not focus it on edge computing just on the base station, right? Let's keep it open, keep it up to the customer to say where should it actually do the compute, on the base station or further back. It was very clear right from start that base station with edge node is very expensive because you have whatever in a country like Germany, you have 20,000 base stations, right? So in any case, so that is that has not really gone to market. It has not been. It was in market, but it was not very successful. And Nokia also had to stop that activity at some point. But we did continue with Satya developing that topic, and basically, so just to be a little bit quicker to stay in time. At the time when 2015-16, we discovered that we have different platforms around. We need to start to harmonize the API just for the benefit of the app developer, that he can assume that his edge application works on any kind of platform. And at the time, there were more and more companies coming in. I call this edge deep dives. We gave them briefing, showed them the business case. We helped them to speed up in the area of edge computing. A large telcos, small telcos, all kinds of other technology companies and service providers came to us, and we helped them to start. It was really a time when this would pick up, and people would have the need to learn and to make up their mind what they want to do with it. In any case, we started 2017 building the Living Edge Lab. We already had previously a kind of lab installation from Nokia Siemens, but then we really started with license, with proper technology behind, with fiber from ground, right, and all this has worked. Then we continued to deliver quite a few edge native applications. In 2019, T-Port Open Scout was launched. We had the interconnect work published 2020. Meetup project started last year, and now we are kind of migrating this into the Living Edge Lab. Now on the public side, Mobile X, Acrino, LFH was shaped at some point, right? And we had first cloud provider products coming in. We have, as Satya mentioned already, we had the telecom operator coming in with products, and by now you have lots of activities and products in the market. I would say they are quite, attractive services. Nevertheless, as Satya has pointed out, there is still room for growth there, right? So, and if you just to summarize this story here, I would say, if we had to put phases, we really started out with a vision phase. Then it was more the edge ideation phase, going in and what can we do with it? What can really drive business here? And the story was always in the beginning, right, to say the telecom operator they do have a kind of strategic control point here. They own the edge, right, by definition. So what always the idea to enable them to make business here, right? But as usual, telecom operators are not very fast in product development, right? And so, but eventually it has worked out, and it's also good that a cloud provider also team up here now, right, and drive that further. In any case, so just to so this is where we finally arrived. Quite a few companies. We have never really tried to become big, right? We are always quite picky whom we accept as a partner, because we wanted to have active partners who are really want to join us to shape edge computing, right? So, but we are quite happy that this at the end was a mix of telecom as well as IT players, right? So, to wrap up, to stay within time, I think, as Satya said already, we have overall been quite successful solving quite a few technology and business issues over time. Not just OEC, right, to be clear, right, but the entire community. We have established edge computing as the next big thing, complementing cloud computing, and we have really positioned it as a business opportunity that grows quite rapidly. There's still things to do, right? So although there is graduation, as Satya says, we do have to, we cannot stop. Learning has to continue, and developing has to continue. So we have still we need more edge native applications that really require edge computing with high standard quality of service. We still need to harmonize the APIs. To be honest, we didn't manage that, right? So, we see the open operator platform activity from GSMA and others who are still driving in that direction. Well, the 1 millisecond air interface is not there today, right? I would say it's 10 round trip or 15. realistically in live networks, right? So what we get from 5G, so we are not there yet. Nevertheless, I still think even if we have 10 milliseconds, it's already good, but for many applications, good enough. But we need really to guarantee it, right? And this is where I really think next steps and future work should focus on, really to have technology to say we can guarantee a certain latency, maybe not the lowest latency, but a certain latency, and probably even more important, it's guarantee or limit the jitter, right? So in any case, and then if we have that, I do believe that we can have also new business models with really guaranteed edge quality of service, right? So that's kind of my view if I look forward. And the guys here from Ericsson, Deutsche Telekom have developed right now one approach, right, to do this edge QoS approach and guarantee the quality of service. It looks quite promising to me. And they are now pushing this through standards. I also hear that they talk to Microsoft, to AWS, and to other telco operators, and that they will try to establish that, right? So keep an eye on that. It's under the term L4S, which is now applied to mobile networks as well. So anyway, let me wrap up here. It has been a real pleasure for me to work with you over the last 10 years, and a lot of fun, a lot of achievements, I would also say, right, jointly. And but I'm not out of the way after this valedictory. It's graduation, right? So I will continue to support Jim and Satya in the Living Edge Lab. We will just change the model there, which Jim will explain in more detail later. So that is kind of my my short session. Any comments or questions? Just to give you also a chance to express yourself. Then let me stop the sharing. And I would then, if there is no comment, I would then actually hand over to our next speaker, which is Guenter. Guenter, can you?
Yes. Yeah. So give me a second. Let me share my screen. All right. Can you see it?
Yes, we see the full. Oh, yes. Now it's good. Perfect.
Okay. All right. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to share some memories I have regarding OEC, and also explain a little bit how it influenced actually the journey of my company regarding edge computing. So stepping back in history, I remember on 11th of May 2015, there was a meeting in Paris, in France. And from the notes I took at the time, it was about a conversation with Huawei, Professor Satya, and Vodafone, and it was on mobile edge computing. And one action came out of that meeting that Vodafone was supposed to decide who is going to travel from the UK or Germany to Pittsburgh for a workshop on 9th and 10th of June. And guess what? That led me to a flight from the UK to Pittsburgh, but the first time in Pittsburgh. And my destination was the Wyndham University Center Hotel. Some of you might recognize this, the entrance hall and also the facade of the building. In the next morning, 9th of June, I wandered also first time to the Gates Center, where the School of Computer Science is located, and the team of Professor Satya, to attend what was the kickoff of the Open Edge Computing Initiative in 2015. And here on the left side, you see actually I think the document we had at the time, which was listing the workshop participants, from Carnegie Mellon, Huawei, Intel, and Vodafone. You can see the objectives we had at the time. and also the workshop agenda kind of starting at the bottom. Most important, mind, we started at 8 o'clock in the morning with coffee and continental breakfast to really get going on the work. We had very few presentations in this first workshop, but I think very fundamental ones. So here we had the presentation from Satya about cloudlets, and I think the point was it's time to go open and bring this into an open ecosystem, as it says here, for mobile cloud convergence. I remember a presentation from a colleague from Huawei, Patrice Hede, which was also quite important because it was trying to explain how we could combine two concepts. Number one, the one about cloudlets, and the second one, which was mobile edge computing, or MAC, as it was emerging at the time, from ETSI. And then a third presentation I remember was from my colleague Rolf Schuster at the time, also with Vodafone. And I think he was kind of sowing the seeds here for this initiative. Let's have an open edge computing initiative, and let's underpin it with some business rationale. So there must be some reason why we would have it. And he tried to give it in June 2015. And I remember in this workshop, and also in follow-up workshops of OEC, we tended to work late, not only until 5:15 here, as it's shown on the clock here, but far later, typically until dinner time, when we either went to this place to pray for the future of open edge computing. And some of you might remember this building. I think it's the Cathedral of Beer as it exists in Pittsburgh. And if we didn't go to this place, we went to another very famous restaurant, more or less to sit down with the creme de la creme of edge computing in this wonderful place, and discuss what we would do next and what kind of plans we would come up with. I think a few of you will recognize, this restaurant and have very good memories of our time there. Now, soon after, it was time to educate our business, at least, about the new thing. And it was 1st of October 2015 when Satya paid us a visit in our headquarters in Newbury in the UK. And this is the title of his presentation. It was about Edge Cloud and what is it good for. And I think it was a good title, but because we were starting to address business people with this. Now, in the early days of OEC, from those early days, I remember some very remarkable demonstrations, which we got from Satya's team at the time. You might remember this one, which is the ping pong game, which was absolutely fantastic demonstration of real-time capability with edge computing. Another famous one was the sandwich application, which is powered through smart glasses and gives you instructions how to do this. And then, of course, things moved on. So since 2016, I think we had ups and downs, but most important, I do believe we had some perseverance. So as Satya and also Rolf pointed out, a lot of work happened already before 2012. 2015, we had this OEC really kickstarted. I think in the years after that, we had a veritable explosion in edge computing, not only in the telco industry, but also in other neighboring industries. There was quite a bit of hype going on. Later on, around 2018, things became a little bit more real and realistic, and Vodafone decided to take it serious and go for a minimum viable product. And that took another couple of years until we were able to launch it commercially, as it is shown on this chart. Now, what happened since 2016, I can give you a few highlights, and much of this has also been inspired by what was happening throughout these years in OEC. For instance, in 2017, we worked on what's called field of view rendering in the network edge. So you see here the paper we published at the time together with colleagues from Huawei Research. And you see at the bottom the architecture where we rendered more or less 360-degree videos at the network edge using a technology called field of view rendering. And this worked really, really well. So, here's a video here with helicopter, and you can move through this 360-degree video, absolutely smooth rendering. We achieved also major a major reduction in the necessary bandwidth from 25 megabits per second downlink to a range of something between 5 and 10 megabits per second, which was quite remarkable. The little picture here on the right side at the bottom shows you the hardware we had in our lab to try this out. Then also in 2017 in May, we were thinking about we need to do more broadcasting about edge computing inside our big Vodafone company. And here you see a picture where during this event, we were in action here, Professor Satya in the middle and myself to the right, and Marco, a colleague of mine, on the left side. We were addressing here a Vodafone audience. Here, Professor Satya is taking questions from our worldwide Vodafone audience in different markets in Europe and elsewhere. And then a year later, in 2018, we actually went to Mobile World Congress and we showed how we could implement a use case called driver monitoring using edge computing. And in this case, we had basically inside a vehicle only a very cheap camera, and everything else was done at the network edge. And you see in the picture on the right side, the steering wheel kind of emulating a vehicle. We had my colleague Simone here bringing in a special suitcase a whole network consisting of base station and core network, to the stand in Barcelona. We had a camera mounted on this black pole on the right side. And then in the image on the left side, you see my colleague Simone here operating the steering wheel and possibly drinking a glass of champagne, which was then recognized by some fancy machine learning model, which was executed at the network edge as not appropriate behavior during driving. It worked remarkably well. Then a year later, in 2019, again in Barcelona at the Mobile World Congress, we showed how deep learning can be wonderfully supported at the network edge. So this was a major project with a technology company called Continental and our various vendors. We showed this at the time at the famous automotive test track in Germany, where we were running some sophisticated AI at the network edge, and we were testing this in quite real circumstances, looking into the impact of different vehicle speeds and radio handover and so on. And then a year later, of course, 2020, COVID-19 hit us, but we still carried on in the background, so to say, and we had other projects going on. Here's an example with Ericsson and Toyota, where we actually studied how we could achieve some seamless handover between different edge clouds, obviously also in an automotive context, and this worked very well. And then 1 year later, in 2021, the time arrived where the system we have been working on, also with our partners, was mature enough that we could go public and launch this. So this is the Vodafone web page, which is announcing the distributed edge computing, as we called it, together with Amazon on the 16th of June, 2021. And by then it was clear that edge computing had become a real business proposition for our company. So this is the website of our business unit, where they are promoting multi-access edge computing here. And of course, take up by application developers requires more and continuous business development. This was alluded to, I think, by Rolf and Satya as well. For this purpose, for instance, we in Vodafone, we have an edge innovation program put in place. This still exists, and this is about nurturing companies in their adoption of the network edge, and that has been actually quite useful because we have a number of example use cases which have all been explored on Vodafone edge computing infrastructure in the meantime, which is ranging from autonomous vehicles on the left side to real-time information about sports activities to coaches and fans on the top right side, to security use cases, here in this case detecting drones and classifying drones, to educational virtual reality applications as shown on the very right side at the bottom. Now, overall, more needs to be done, I think, by the industry to propel edge computing forward. I think in this time frame, 2020-21, we had a little bit of a slowdown more generally, I think, induced by the COVID-19 pandemic. But as we now are hopefully moving out of this pandemic, and we are also getting advances, for instance, in artificial intelligence and machine learning at the edge, this should bring a boost, so to say, to edge computing and propel it forward, as we hope. There are a number of things which I think can still be improved. And possibly Rolf also showed a list of items which further need to be worked on. I fully agree with this one. There is one point which I would like to highlight here, but in particular from my point of view, a thing we could fix. We had, I think, in the telecoms industry, quite an obsession with network latency only. And if you look into this chart, we managed, we put in possibly, millions and maybe billions overall into improving network latency and driving this down with, transition from 4G to 5G and so on, down to 10 milliseconds, as somebody mentioned today as well. But I think we have largely forgotten to look into the application runtime itself at the edge. And this chart gives you an indication, illustration, if you were able to reduce the application runtime substantially, here, for instance, shown on this chart by a factor of 10, then the whole equation would dramatically change, and real-time application at the edge would really become not only highly valuable, but possibly it would be a game changer. And what we have done in our companies, we have really looked into the question, how can this actually be achieved? And we started to look into hardware acceleration in particular for AI applications, also deep learning applications, for the edge. And as one example I can share with you, we have been working with a startup company called GraphCore. They have developed especially a special chip, or you could call it a coprocessor, which is able to accelerate deep learning applications. And we measured from our experiments quite nice results. And these things could change the game of how edge computing further develops in the market. And then in which ways has OEC been unique? I think it has been inspired by academic research, of course, and a very bold vision from the early days. OEC, I think, was also nicely fueled by a wonderful set of prototype applications, which were all coming from Professor Satya's team. We have the associated lab, of course. We had a core group, I think, of committed and like-minded participants in OEC. And in that respect, it was also a unique combination of academic and industry partnership. And how has it made a difference from my point of view? I think we very much got inspired by all its participants, of course. We also got spurred on by wonderful research results coming from Professor Satya's team. I remember we were reading lots of papers coming from his team, and also, not only studied, but also used actually open source code. And finally, I think we benefited from a wonderful diversity and freshness of thinking in OEC. And in that respect, I think we can be proud of it. And I want to finish here with my special thanks to Professor Satya and Rolf, of course, but also to all the other members of OEC who have participated here over the years. And I think it was a wonderful journey overall. All right.
Thanks a lot, Guenter. Thanks for the warm words. And was interesting to see some of the old pictures here, right? So good. Thanks. Also, thanks for pointing forward, right, and giving some hint of what might be next. So then let's just, in the interest of time, let's right away move over to Caroline Chen from Intel. Caroline, a warm welcome to you. Intel has been there right from start, as we have learned already from all three previous speakers, right? So you have played a big role over the years in supporting Satya, in supporting the OEC. And so I really look forward to your presentation.
No, thank you very much. And thank you for having me here. And it's been a wonderful journey with you. In the process doing this, and I actually had my son actually graduated from CMU and from computer science, so it was all worked out. So I wound up going to Pittsburgh at least twice a year, once for the spring and then once for Parents Weekend in the fall. So that was wonderful. He's now working in Google, and he actually told me that Google was much easier than CMU. That says a lot about how tough the school is. But I just want to share quickly some of what OEC has done that led to where we are today. You know, so maybe share a little bit of what Intel is doing. I'm going to try to share screen, see if I'm able to do this. Do I have the share screen option?
Yes, you should have. Just press share screen at the bottom.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Let me see if I'm successful. To share. Okay. I don't know if folks can see this.
Across,
okay,
but we see the full screen still. If you can go in presentation mode, it might be slightly better.
Like this?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
So, and also some of you might recognize Valerie Parker, who is also with Intel. She's been with this journey from the very beginning. In many sense, I work a lot with you guys, and I can see Babu online. Hi, Babu, Mark, many friends, and Professor Satyed. And recently we had a really good opportunity to meet up with everyone. Jim, of course, was my Intel colleague now with the CMU. So it really is, when we started this whole OEC vision, it now becoming true, right? When we first started, everybody thinking like, where is this is gonna go? The whole cloud-led, the Mac system, and having this living lab. How our lives have changed, our society have changed, and 5G and edge, and now really becoming the norm. In fact, in the beginning of May, we actually, Intel has an event here in Dallas called the Vision, which used to be called Intel Developer Forum. The whole sole focus is on enterprise and verticals. Can you believe that? Like, now you're connecting, you know, the 5G, the network, the cloud, the AI, everything together. The vision of OEC really becoming part of our main drive for revenue inside Intel. So what we've been now on the trajectory inside Intel is something what we call a new compute paradigm. We see the cloudification of everything really underpinning all the business we have. So currently, I'm part of the network and edge group. If you think of it that way, what we have always thought that the connectivity is the enabler, the transformation, the cloudification of the network really started driving a lot of data demands. And AI is everywhere. AI, we're seeing a lot of the workload through the cloud is AI related. In fact, we're looking at probably by 2025, more than half of the traffic through the data center will be AI, inferencing, and so on. So if you look at it that way, we cannot be treating data the same way as we have still. So now we're calling something Mac 2.0. If you remember, some of us started the whole SC Mac together. It was very telco-centric, the Mac 1.0. But Mac 2.0 becomes a hyper-converged edge and lots of AI underpinned by the private network. By private network, we don't really mean has to be unlicensed spectrum. We actually meant private network come into hybrid, could come in, actually become a public network with a network slice, targeting the verticals, or a pure private network like CBRS spectrum, or what you have in Germany, the private network spectrum. So it come in many flavors, but we do see the emergence of Mac 2.0 led and driven and underpinned by a network. The network is likely to be multi-access, it could be Wi-Fi, it could be SDN, and of course LTE and 5G. I think some of the speakers before talked about Wi-Fi versus Wi-Fi. We see them coexist. We do not see them like one over the other. There are use cases for Wi-Fi, use cases for 5G. A lot of it's around SLA, guaranteed performance. We initially thought it was going to be latency, but it's actually less and less about latency. It's more and more about data sovereignty to be able, and contextual aspect of the data. So Bosch is the one example that we actually announced. We work together with Bosch. So we talked about that a lot as an Industrial 2.0, but we also look at a lot of the mission critical and non-mission critical. Both of them have a aspect of making this whole MET 2.0 successful and useful. Critical thing that we had to resolve, and we actually got to talk a lot about inside Intel about where's the easy button. How do you make it easier to do? So we're sharing this data widely, and it's not just Intel data. We actually pull from different resources. The interesting thing, if you look at it, is that the Mac total TAM is actually much larger than the network side of it. And even more interestingly is the software piece is actually quite significant. The growth of software and the services is actually even faster than the logics, the silicon side. So you see Intel start pivoting to a lot of software-focused business. We actually have a group now just focusing on software, headed by Greg Lavender, who used to be in the VMware side. Of course, our new CEO, Pat Gelsinger, after Intel, spent a significant amount of time in VMware. So there's an overall shift to put a lot of focus on the software piece, and in addition to our traditional Intel's hardware-centric focus. So hopefully the number would tell the story, right? We always chase the big pie, but if you look at what Intel does today, we are probably in a 5G core network, we're well north of 80-90% of the market share. In the RAN, the radio side, we have publicly disclosed the street that we are about 40% of the market share. So we are in a very good position from a hardware perspective. What we need to focusing on is to drive the easy button, provide the multi-access nature, and also the software, the enabling software to make it easier for the developers, to attract developers. If you remember, Professor Satya, so going back to what we wanted the OEC to begin with, make it easier for developers to write and develop apps on top of a telco. You got to hide all that telco ugliness from people who used to write enterprise softwares. So then where do we see the big focus? We see industrial for sure. We talked about Bosch making a lot of a public announcement on that. But because of what the recent last 2 years events, we also see significant education. I'll have an example later on, this what that we've done on education side. Smart cities and transportation, we actually announced with Amazon that we'll be building out a large private network at the Utah Inland Port Authority. We see retail, not in the way that people think of retail, but more like how do you do a frictionless stores, especially given all of the labor shortage, inventory management, all the supply chain constraint. So, and also in addition, what I didn't put up here was the DoD, the Department of Defense, significant amount of funding coming there. So industry is reacting to see how we can do that. So we show some examples here. Bosch and all these are both announced that how do you do reconfigurable factory of the future. Not just Intel's engaged, multiple other partners all engaged in this. It's a way to find a blueprint to make 5G and MET 2.0 be part of the industrial revolution that we're seeing. Education, we actually did announce this was in the Sacramento School District, partner with the AWS and a company called Mac Computing. So I also serve on a 5G Open Innovation Lab in Seattle with Microsoft and T-Mobile, Dell, VMware, and so on. To Ericsson was also part of it to really start driving a much more rich education experience for our children. And that has now been scaled across the United States because of all of the funding that's being made available to make smart education, irregardless of the families, where you live in the family. This is what I talked about, the intelligent crossroads network, using 5G connectivity to enable a smart logistics hub in Utah, who happen to be, it's not a port authority, but it's an inland port authority with the cargoes, railroads, airports coming in. You can see from the diagram, it's about Internet of Things. It's about IoT. It's about tracking the cargo movement. Security and surveillance become actually a very key part. What is being shipped? Who is it going to? Is there any theft going on? I don't know if you people saw recently there was a significant theft in both the UPS trucks and as well as railroads, cargoes. So all of this becoming the supply chain is under so much constraint that the digitalization of supply chain actually becomes a key ingredient parts that we're working on. So net, I think the journey that we started with everyone in the OEC, that vision has become true. The experience we learn from there enable Intel and all of our ecosystem to start driving into something what we call MetroDAO, which is the future. And what we looking forward to the next journey with all of you guys.
All right, thanks a lot. Any comments or questions from people? Okay, very good. I think this was quite an inspiring insight in what you have been doing and also looking forward in what you plan to do. Good. So our next speaker is also a key person, key company for the OEC. It is actually Crown Castle, and I welcome Mark to give us his view on the OEC. Mark, the floor is yours. Yeah, we can see the slide, not in the presentation mode yet.
Are we looking good now?
No, we are in presenter mode now. You will make it.
Let's see. Bear with me for a second here.
You have to go to the 3 dots and then switch the screen. If you go to screen.
Okay.
I know it's always the same thing. You can also leave it like that if you want.
Okay, I'll just leave it like this.
Okay, that's fine.
So one of the things I wanted to comment on with one son in college and the second one starting next year to be able to get a PhD in 7 years, as the OEC has done, is quite the accomplishment. As I see Carolyn nodding her head there, and I'm hoping my kids can do the same thing. And I just wanted to talk about Crown Castle's involvement with CMU and the OEC. So we're really an early believer in the edge. And one of the things, and we've talked about the low latency connectivity and the infrastructure that's required to be able to have these distributed facilities with high-speed connections. And that's really important to be able to realize the types of use cases that have been outlined, AI, ML, the augmented reality, et cetera. And we're really starting to see more of that come into the real world. And we think that the assets that we bring, as well as others, between the fiber and the tower locations, and then the connectivity into the networks of the operators, but then also the hyperscaler providers and new entrants that come up, will be critical to be able to really scale the edge computing ecosystem. And one of the key things that's really interesting to us and why we wanted to become involved with the OEC and the work that Rolf and Satya have done is to be able to create this open ecosystem. To know the scaling really comes through that collaboration, which was enabled through this initiative that was started. So what we're seeing is the evolution of the virtualized shared infrastructure. So if we look at what the applications, Carolyn talked about the school system, we also have the ports that are out there as well. This really requires a number of different companies working together to be able to realize how do we take advantage of edge compute, plus the applications go on top of it. It starts with the basic research that Satya is doing. How do I hand off an edge compute functionality from one base station to another base station into an enterprise, et cetera. So to be able to have that underlying fabric of communications infrastructure to be able to enable that to happen is really important. And what we've done working with Jim and others within the OEC is be able to deploy a real world test bed that says, essentially, show me the money. You guys have talked about all these low latency applications. What do we do with that? How do we make that happen? So we have installations at the Carnegie Mellon campus, one on campus, and then two within the right of way. So these are close to retail locations. I'm not sure if we've got one outside of the restaurant where we've had many great evenings within the OEC, but fairly close by there. So if we look at some of the next steps that the LEL can take on, is really being able to move even further out of the lab into these different environments where we've deployed a network. This network started off with the band 42 and in the 3.5 frequency band. Now we've moved into the CBRS band, which enables a multitude of devices that are commercially available to be able to take advantage of the infrastructure that's out there. So right now we're on a 4G device, it's all fiber connected, software upgradable to 5G. So really to be able to take advantage of the convergence, not only of having the wireless network, but also the edge compute. So within that compute facility, you have, working with partners like AWS and JMA, the core network, the RAN, that's very flexible as well. So it looks at that whole end-to-end ecosystems that enables these applications to ride on top of it. Luckily, I don't have to pay a royalty to Satya and his team for every time I've talked about being able to use augmented realities to put IKEA furniture together and wondering why I have leftover screws and nuts and bolts. So that's one of those stories I like to tell in a lot of my different presentations that I've done. So when we think about the journey of what has happened within the edge evolution, around 5 years ago, it wasn't, I was almost going to say it was small enough that everybody that was participating within these conferences could share a cab, but maybe a couple of cabs. But I remember attending a few in London and Berlin and elsewhere, where maybe there were 25 to 30 attendees. And now every event that you talk about, from Connect Edge to MWC to others, there is edge as a primary topic of those events. So if we've moved out of from this niche conversation with a couple of researchers into mainstream, essentially. And I have a next slide where we talk about a demonstration that we did at ConnectX in 2019 in conjunction with Mobile Edge X and others. So really the OEC highlighted the importance of an open ecosystem and brought these industry players together. What we've seen from Guenter and others is the collaboration that's required. And it's not just being done by one part of the ecosystem, it's really many players that really push this vision together. And these real world deployments in the industrial settings and partnerships around the carriers and hyperscalers really demonstrate that need for the edge processing. And we're seeing things like the Amazon Go stores where you walk in, you have to have that edge processing with computer vision to be able to walk out of the store with all your goods without having to go through the cashier, and we'll start to see more and more of that. So this is just a quick reminder of the demonstration that was done at ConnectX. This is down in Orlando. Here, Vince Tree from the Crown Castle team was involved with this. We were able to show really the importance of having those low latency connections. And this was a face detection comparison between edge and cloud and some of the other applications that we were able to demonstrate. So the idea is to take it beyond the lab into more real world applications and be able to move that from the Carnegie Mellon campus environment out into real retail space. We've already started to touch on some of the different use cases, and they really started to expand. And what we want to be able to show is, how do I move those from theoretical use cases to real world use cases? We were talking about how different entities can really take advantage, and what are they doing with the high-speed connections. We look in the deployments that the carriers are doing with the US, especially within large stadiums, deploying millimeter wave, huge amounts of bandwidth, requires low latency. Well, what are the consumers doing with that? Augmented reality. And to be able to have a very good augmented reality experience, where you can have the statistics of a soccer player, football player, baseball player live on your phone, you need that low latency connection as well. So we have moved beyond the lab, as Satya likes to talk about the graduation, into the real world. And these are exciting applications that consumers now want to be able to take advantage of. I talked a little bit about the edge ecosystem. So you certainly have the telco players that have been involved in from the early days worldwide. Of course, this from Crown Castle is a more US-centric view. But I know not only the telcos, and you see the Dish and T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, all of them are talking about edge and partnerships with the hyperscalers. Enterprises have gotten into the edge compute spaces, and other smaller companies like Baker and Aleph and Equinix. Not that Equinix is that small, but certainly people that have traditionally been in the data center business are now then moving that into and expanding into the edge. And I'll wrap up by saying for future opportunities, the carriers are transitioning from the 4G to 5G core. So what do we see as really the ramp up? It's that standalone 5G core that will enable low latency connections, will be critical for consumer use cases. We want to continue having that open ecosystem to be able to drive scale, to be able to have a similar experience if you're an iPhone user, if you're an Android user, if you're a T-Mobile or Verizon user, et cetera. That really helps promote the utilization of these low latency applications. The facilitation of compute resources really is being driven by the continued research that happens at the university level. So we plan to continue to be very involved with the LEA. We want to be able to see more of these applications being created by the software developers at the university space. And we want to have the ability to test those in the real world, like we showed at Walnut Street and at Forbes and on campus as well. So I want to once again thank Satya and Rolf for all their hard work, and it's been a very exciting journey, and I'm looking forward to see how it continues.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks a lot. Any comment or question from people? I guess I still remember, Mark, when it probably was around 2015 when Alan Bock approached Satya and myself with the idea of bringing Crown into the edge, right? It was right from start. It was quite convincing, as you are the edge as Crown Castle, as a tower company, right? And so it was really very nice to work with you over time. And big thanks again also for enabling this Living Edge Lab, which was quite a crucial building block, let's say, of the OEC. And as you can see, we will continue this going forward. We even call it Living Edge Lab going forward, right? As a focus vehicle. So good. Thanks, Mark, for this insight. So we are actually perfectly on time. So I would hand over to Jim, who is now talking about what is next.
Thank you, Rolf, and thanks to everybody who's spoken before. Can people see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes, nice and clear.
Great. Okay, so I guess I first want to start with a big thank you to Rolf and to Satya for the opportunity to be part of the Open Edge Computing Alliance initiative over the last few years. It has been a great experience. I've loved working with both of them, as with all of you, as this initiative has progressed. I am sort of a late comer to the party. I got involved first, I think around 2017 was my first workshop that I attended while I was still with Intel. But I was so impressed, and there were sort of, over the time, three things I think about the OEC that make it very, very unique in terms of industry initiatives. I'll mention the first two right now that to me, of all the ones that I've been involved with over the 40 plus years of my career, really stand out. The first is a real focus on low overhead. I can't tell you how many times in other initiatives things get hung up in different sorts of legal agreements and bylaw terms, and the complexity of joining and continuing to stay a member. And the OEC made a particular focus on not taking that route. And I think it paid off in terms of the ability to get people to come on board quickly and to participate and do things effectively that they thought were valuable. The second piece of it was a real focus on results and output and actually doing things as part of the initiative. Many initiatives I found are focused heavily on sort of what I refer to as paper products, whereas the OEC and the CMU team have always focused on actually building things, creating software, demonstration, the capability to show the things that they're talking about in a very tangible form. So those are the first two. I'll come back to the second, or the third one in a second. So my presentation today is really about the Living Edge Lab going forward. And I like to think of this as, now that we've had the graduation, you're all members of the alumni club. And I'm going to talk about the alumni club. But it'll be different than some alumni clubs in that it will be open. So it won't just be alumni of the OEC that over time will be part of this. We're hoping to draw in more industry partners to participate in the work that we're doing here at the Living Edge Lab over the coming years. But we're creating a mechanism now that consists of the core members of the OEC, many of the people that we've invited to previous workshops, and then others as they come along will be part of the Living Edge Lab community in the future. So I will talk about sort of what is the same and what has changed as part of the OEC, and then how do you stay engaged on an ongoing basis from here on out. See if I can get that. So some of the things that haven't changed are really the things that we're doing, the way we're operating as an entity. This is a slightly modified version of the slide we've used for the last couple of years for the Living Edge Lab. The focus for the lab stays on edge native applications, the platforms and tools that support them, and edge infrastructure. That does not change at all. And we still look to have a very strong industry collaboration with all of you and others going forward. What does shift a little bit is we're moving more back towards a research agenda and a pioneering agenda. One of the things about the OEC has been a focus on ecosystem and business value development to show the world that edge computing is valuable and to get the industry moving. And that brings me to the third thing that the OEC has done that is different, and that is this graduation. We looked around at what's happening in the industry, what's happened since that 2014-15 founding, and said, much of what we were trying to get done through the OEC has been accomplished, and there are initiatives in place today that are and companies, as our previous speakers have talked about, that are in a very strong position to continue the commercialization portion of edge computing adoption forward. So we feel it's important for us to do what we are good at, which is really focus on the leading edge, not just the research side of it, but the pioneering technology parts of it that are just emerging, new problems to be solved, new things that focus on making the work of edge computing and what comes around edge computing very successbut. So we're shifting our focus, I'll just say, a little bit more back to the research side, back to the pioneering side, but still continuing to operate from the Living Edge Lab perspective in a very similar way. Outputs would be the same. They're similar, and I added one to this one because one of the things that I hear from a lot of you is that one of the values of working with CMU is access to some of the CMU graduates, and I know there are a few of them on this bridge today that will attest to that, and so we added that as one of our outputs. So that this part doesn't really change significantly, nor does our focus on edge native applications. This is really one of the things that we still feel is a major driver for the success of edge computing, and one where there's the most room for better understanding some of the key technology issues that go with edge computing, like how do you decide what edge node to run on. And so we're going to continue this focus very heavily, as well as the sort of underpinning of this in terms of tools and development capabilities. So nothing really changes here at all from our focus. Now I want to get into a few of the details around the specifics and just what is different, what is the same. So from the alignment perspective, we historically aligned a lot of what we were doing around the OEC charter per se, which had the two heads of pioneering and industry enablement and driving adoption. We're going to push back, as I said, more towards the research side, more towards the pioneering side. And in doing so, we're going to shift the model away from sort of a work stream and direct engagement to fully go towards direct engagement. What I mean by direct engagement is we work directly between CMU and the companies involved in any particular research project that we're doing. The OEC always had a priority on multiple companies being part of each project. The interconnect work stream, for those of you who are part of that, was probably the best example of that, where we had members contributing in a variety of different ways to that initiative as we went through it. That was in part so that we could get the collaboration going across, but also in part to help make sure we were staying on track with the what were the business interests of each of the members. We still want to do multi-company projects together, and we'll continue ones, for example, that we're doing with ARM and Meta, and putting together things like we did with JMA, AWS, and Crown Castle for the network. So we will still continue to do that sort of thing, but we're also now more open to some of the other types of projects that we've had, which have been, I'll say, more direct engagement one-on-one with companies. So for example, some of the work we did with Seagate around decode acceleration was specifically with Seagate, and we didn't have other members involved with that. So we're going to encourage those multi-company collaborations, but we're more open to working individually with companies as well. Historically, results from the projects that we did were open predominantly to the OEC members. That was part of what you got as being part of the OEC. But in general, over time, the results became available to everybody outside of the membership body. And so we're going to recognize that, and going forward, the research results we produce will make public right away, and they will be visible to everyone. There are exceptions to that, of course, when we do research engagements with people on a specific basis, and that's a requirement of the engagement. We can accommodate that, but it's better if we can publish results openly to the world, and so that sort of closed model would like to have be sort of a rare occurrence. The participation model in the OEC was around membership and a broad set of invited guests that came to the workshops particularly. We're going to shift that quite a bit towards what we call project supporters. Those are people who are actively participating with us in projects and ongoing discussions with CMU and the Living Edge Lab. And then a much more broad, open community that so any qualified company can join. The difference, of course, in those is the resource contribution for people who are involved in projects is sort of required as being part of the project, but the the community members don't need to make any kind of contribution to be part of it. Historically, your membership was part of what funded the activities that we do here. Now we're going to much more of a direct project-based model where resources, if you want to do a project with us, you bring resources either in terms of funding for it or in terms of in-kind resources and people, equipment, et cetera. We're shifting the communication a bit. Obviously, OEC winding down, we now have upgraded the Living Edge Lab website. We've formed a couple different LinkedIn groups to collaborate through. And we have an email list specifically set up for the LEL, and I'll talk about that in a second. The workshops and biweeklies, they go away. The work streams model won't formally exist. Obviously, we have a multi-company project. We'll have to keep doing that sort of work stream-like approach for those multi-company projects. But they'll be replaced by specific meetings for the projects that are ongoing. And we are considering and hoping to do some occasional webinars a few times a year where we get together and talk about some of the work that's happened coming out of the Living Edge Lab. So that's sort of the big items of shift at a specific level. Another thing that really hasn't changed significantly is our collaboration model. You come to us with an idea that you have based on something you've seen or you're interested in doing with us. We work together to design what that work is going to look like. Both parties contribute, or any parties involved contribute resources to it. Resources may be expertise, funding, people, et cetera, equipment. Then we do the work and we publish the results in a variety of different forms. So this is not that much different than what you've seen from us in the past, but you can get a sense of what that process looks like if some of you may not have seen this before. So from a resources perspective, with the OEC winding down, we upgraded the CMU Living Edge Lab website. You can find this, the link is there. We'll send this out. I'll send the links out to an email to everybody shortly after this. And also, if you do a Google search on CMU Living Edge Lab or a Google search on CMU Edge Computing, we pop up right at the top. So that's always a way to find it. We also created a LinkedIn page that is a LEL page. And this is where we'll put most news announcements. They'll show up on our website as well. But if you're a LinkedIn user and you follow this page, you'll get all the announcements and output from us in terms of what's going on, et cetera. So we really encourage you to follow us on that site. You can get to it from this link, or at the bottom of our CMU website is a link to be able to get to that page, as well as the third one on here, which is the LinkedIn community. This is where we're hoping to get people to participate in discussions and collaborations through that pipeline. So it's a good place if you want to connect with other people who are interested in the Living Edge Lab. That's a good place to go for that. We also will have a mailing list, but that mailing list is sort of a no reply mailing list that's intended mostly for us to communicate things out to you. So not everybody's going to be on the LinkedIn site or in the community, and not everybody's going to be checking the CMU website on a daily basis like I do. So that's a way for us to send that important notifications out to everybody. And there's a link there to be able to subscribe and unsubscribe from that list if you want. Everybody on this call will automatically be on that list. So if you start seeing mails you don't want to receive, feel free to go ahead to that link there and unsubscribe. When all else fails, you can email me or Rolf, and we'll be happy to respond or point you in the right direction. So let's see. So I think that's my last one. Oh, just one. Oops, sorry, lost So I did want to just quickly show the people of the Living Edge Lab. Somebody was asking me the other day, what is the Living Edge Lab? And I said, it's mostly the people that are involved with it. And so this is the group of folks that are part of the Living Edge Lab from our team here at CMU. So if you run into any of them, please say thank you for all the work they've been doing for you. And that's it. And once again, my big thanks to Satya and Rolf and all of the OEC members and participants for all the great work over the years.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Now this has been pretty important now to explain a little bit where are we moving to, and thanks, Jim, for making it so explicit and so clear. So some things will stay as they have been, but quite a few other things also change. We strongly believe that, considering the state of edge computing, that this is the right direction for us to move and to hopefully move together with you. Any comments or questions? Do you agree with all that? Is there any disagreement? Is there any maybe suggestion? What else you would like to see? What you would like to do?
Just here's good. Just more general feedback. I think all the bits and pieces I have heard today are inspiring. What Jim mentioned regarding the Living Edge Lab, it should live on. Also, Rolf, what you mentioned in your remarks regarding what has been done and what still needs to be done. There's a lot of work still to be done. So it's interesting that we, on the one hand, we feel graduation time has come, right? And on the other hand, there is still work to be done. And so if people can keep working on this whole topic, it will be great.
Okay. Yeah. As Satya has said in the beginning, graduation doesn't mean stop. It means now you enter a new phase, and you do things differently from there on, but you still have to progress, right? And I think this is the same here in a way, right? So other comments or questions on the way forward now? Everybody is happy. Everybody agrees with the direction. Okay. I guess from my side, the important message is that some of the OEC elements will disappear, like the bi-yearly the workshops and the twice a year and the weekly sessions. However, the actual core of the work we have done will just continue, move forward, and I really look forward to also be part of that in the future. Good. Now, any other comment or question before I hand over to Satya for the last words on this session? So we are pretty good in time, actually. So no, if there's no other question, then I would hand over to Satya.
Thank you very much, Rolf. Let me put this up. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Fantastic. So huge thanks to Guenter, to Caroline, and to Mark, and of course to Rolf and Jim. It was so wonderful to, especially seeing all those pictures of the restaurant and the fun times we had. The OEC is a very, very rich set of memories over many years, and I think this event really brings back in one place how much we have accomplished together as a group that we can be very proud of. So I just wanted to end with just a few words. perhaps the most profound statement about technology that I've ever heard was actually made about 30 years ago, about the same time as the paper that I mentioned about what is unique to mobility. Was by Mark Weiser, who was the chief scientist and director of Xerox PARC Research Lab at that time. And Roy Want, whom some of you know, was at Intel and then at Google, worked for him. He was one of the authors of the 2009 paper. So he made a very, and by the way, the work that Mark and company did at Xerox PARC really in many ways is the foundation of our vision of the Internet of Things. So he called it ubiquitous computing. It's also been called pervasive computing. It's also been called Internet of Things. Regardless of what you call it, the beast is the same. Environments that are saturated with computing and communication and transform our lives. So that's the world we're trying to create. So the point that Mark Weiser made is captured in just these two sentences, that truly the most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they're indistinguishable from it. So that's the point. GPS navigation to get me from place A to place B falls into this category today. You don't think about it. You just assume it's there. Few people actually carry a paper map anymore. In the early days of GPS, you might have done it. Just like in the early days when LCD projectors were brand new, you might have had backup slides in case the thing at the destination didn't work. But after some time, you just start depending on it and you don't even think about it. Edge computing should have that goal. Not necessarily computing itself, but the applications we create, edge native applications that we create, that they become so commonplace that you don't even ask, oh, do you have edge computing here? It's like asking, do you have Wi-Fi here? Because it's so commonplace that you think of it as universal. So we're clearly not there with edge computing. Your work, all of you on this call and ours over the next many years, is what is going to take us there. And so that is our goal. The paths we take to get there are going to be different for different reasons. You have different companies, different goals. But the important point is the end result captured in this statement here is the same. It is to make edge computing so ubiquitous that you do not have to think about it, that it's there like air, like water, is universal. So I want to end with the observation, which has been made by many people, that success has 1,000 fathers, right? And people think of me as the father of edge computing, but there are actually 1,000 fathers. So all of you on the OEC initiative over the years have provided technical expertise. You've provided us financial support, without which we couldn't have done the work. You've generously donated equipment to us. I recall Guenter giving us the very first 4G LTE, 5 milliwatt transmitter, eNote B from Nokia. Intel and Caroline especially, and Valerie have been very generous with the equipment that served as our cloudlets. And many of you have supported us with gifts in our work, and that has been crucial to get us here. The federal funding, I would be remiss if I did not recognize that DARPA has supported this work. The National Science Foundation has been a generous supporter of this work. This is taxpayer money, so we greatly appreciate, and part of the reason that I've always believed it's important to do my work, university work, open source, is because so much of it is supported by taxpayer money. The ability to return to the people what they've given to us is, I believe, very important. I want to thank my research team, especially Jan and Tom, who have been with me all the way. And of course, all the graduate students. Ultimately, it's their work, not mine, which really constitutes the body of work that we've published about, released open source, and shared with all of you. And Jim, who came on board, is now a major part of our team and will continue to be moving forward. And of course, Rolf, without whom we cannot imagine the OEC, and will continue to be an integral part of the Living Edge Lab and our edge computing research as we move forward. Now that Rolf does not have to spend so much time on the activities of the OEC, I hope to be able to use his mind for research and for collaboration much more. So hopefully, Rolf, that you will have as much fun doing that as you've done creating the OEC with us and helping to make it get to this point. So thanks to all of you. I just want to end at this point. It has been a fabulous journey, lots more ahead. If we were in person, we'd break out the champagne at this point, but we can only offer you virtual champagne. So thank you all and all the best.